Howdy, I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and you're listening to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we're laying the groundwork for our land, ourselves, and for generations to come by looking at the way every thread of life is connected to one another. Communities above ground mirror the communities below the soil, which mirror the vast community of the cosmos. As the saying goes, as above, so below. Join me as we take a curious journey into agriculture, biology, history, spirituality, health, and so much more. I can't wait to unearth all of these incredible topics alongside you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we are exploring the threads of what it means to be humans woven into this earth and laying the groundwork for what is to come. I am your host, Kate Kavanaugh, and it is such a pleasure to be back after my accidental hiatus over the last quite a few months, and I am really excited to be bringing you a guest today that I actually recorded with in June. And Lindsey Browne Davis is an incredible hunter, a writer, an entrepreneur, and a citizen scientist, and all-around incredible human. And I know that as of my recording of this intro, she has passed through the birth portal and is currently embarking on her first hunting season with baby in tow. And I think that she is just such an incredible inspiration. As I was going through this episode and kind of looking for clips and not remembering the interview so well because it had been a minute, I was really struck with what Lindsey has to say about going after our dreams. And in this, she sort of details, and I don't want to give away too much, this process of getting to hunt an elk with a bow, this sort of black belt, top level hunt, and the pitfalls and triumphs and doubts along the way. I recorded an episode the other week that kind of details the place that I've been in and just how important it is for me to return to this podcast as an anchor and a tether to this earth during what has been a very hard time for me, and I think a hard time for many of us, for reasons both local and global. And I realized that this podcast, this dream that I have, and I've spoken a lot about this dream, the dream of the podcast, how much it really provides me with an anchor into my life, into purpose, into mission, back into earth, and back into community. And I really see this now that I've had this time off where I have been, for lack of a better word, lonely for the podcast, and having this longing to return to this dream while simultaneously experiencing a sense of shame and disappointment that I have let myself down, perhaps that I have let listeners down, and that really difficult thing of getting back on the horse. And as I was listening to Lindsey talk about dreams, I'm reminded that the dreams that we are working towards, that we are building in our life, the purpose and connectivity that we are building in our lives is not a linear path, that it is going to have peaks and it's going to have troughs. It's going to have periods where we are perhaps traversing dark underpassages underneath the mountain, these sort of morias of the mind. And that was maybe way too geeky of a reference, but we're just going to keep going. Trespassing through these spaces where maybe we drop our dream for a minute. And I think my hope is that it allows us to better see our dream for what it is and its meaning within our lives and a sense of mission. And I hope to bring that into future episodes. And I also hope to continue to bring a grain of honesty about where I am and how I am traversing this, because, as I said in that solo episode, I just think that it's so rare that we get to see people in the process of going through hard times, we just often see them reflecting about those times as they look back on them. And so where I am right now is in this process of trying to get back on the horse and meeting resistance in the form of shame and disappointment in myself, and a feeling that it's hard to return to the work that we do in this world when we've taken time off, or to a dream that we've taken time off from. And there's just that sort of resistant barrier there. And so this is a big part, releasing this first interview that had been recorded for some time now, and really wanting to share it with you all, because I think that Lindsey is incredible in terms of articulating aspects of our ecosystem, of hunting and of dreaming, and of going through the daily act of working towards those dreams, even if that act is mundane, even if you are not called to do it in the moment, but the act of sitting there and creating consistency, which is something that I hope to find again. I want to thank you. I'm still in the process of replying to the messages that I received following my solo episode. So if you haven't received a reply from me, it will come in time. I am just, thank you. Thank you so much. One of the things that I really want to do in a future episode is talk about what it means to ask for, and then in particular to receive help. And so thank you for helping me. It warmed my heart, and it fueled my mission in ways that I don't think I can yet put into words. And I am just so appreciative. We have some really fun episodes coming up. A couple of you have reached out to me with guest ideas, which I really appreciated. I really want the back and forth of this act of podcasting, not just for it to be me speaking into the void, but for us to be in conversation as much as is possible. If you want to support the podcast, there are a couple of ways in the show notes. As always, one of the best ways to support the podcast is to drop a review on Apple Podcasts or leave a star rating on Apple or Spotify. This helps other people find the podcast and feel that sense of, oh, I'm getting into some really meaty and juicy conversations that I want to be hearing. Not too keen to just keep prattling on today. I really want to bring you this interview, especially because it has been such a long time in the making. Lindsey's work is unparalleled in the hunting space, and I'm just so grateful for the knowledge and the wisdom that she really shares in the context of this episode. So go find her on social media and enjoy this conversation with Lindsey Browne Davis. We're just talking about liminal spaces, and I have been thinking a lot about liminal spaces, so maybe that's a good place to open, because I feel like you are in many ways, the ultimate liminal space between maidenhood and motherhood, and in this real cusp of about to enter that portal and to meet your baby. So I actually want to open with that.
Yeah. Well, waking up today, I'm 37 weeks pregnant, which is truly something I never thought I would pursue in life, which has been, like so many things, like a wonderful surprise and a good lesson in the notion that I'm always going to be getting to know myself, like there are these like hunting was one of those things for me too, where it was like, I never thought I would do it. Nobody in my family hunts, like had opinions about it before it was something that I explored. And now it's something that deeply patterns my entire life. And so, yeah, motherhood is definitely like this wonderful new adventure and this continual lesson, and that like I'm always going to be this developing person. And there's something about that that's super exciting. I'm like, ooh, what's going to happen in 10 years? Like, what ways are my, mind and heart going to open to new things that I, thought would never be something that I would be pursuing in the past.
I love that because I'm very similar in that I oftentimes surprise myself. And as I was kind
Yeah.
of going through your background and everything that you've done, there are a lot of these big threads that you've woven together. You've worked in permaculture, you've built homes, built gardens, you've raised animals, you've done hunting, you've done advocacy work. And I really enjoy when people have that scope where they're really devoted to developing skills and interests and driven by curiosity, but also very fluid in where it ends up taking them.
Yeah. Oh, I'm such a skills junkie. It's like
You
it's
and me
like
both.
yeah, it's like the thing that I don't know how to do is the thing I want to learn,
Mm,
and just and like totally hobby addicted. And I think that came from one just being like a raised like a tough tomboy girl and
mhm,
like getting to sort of redefine some of these stereotypes in in the last few decades. But also having these experiences where, there's one that really sticks out as like this point in my journey where I'd been interested in food and nutrition, and it was all because I was an athlete, and it was based on my performance and output, and it had no connection to land or food system health or anything like that. And over the years, I started to kind of experiment with food and performance and go from, vegetarian to learning about seasonal food and realizing I had this like big disconnect in my life about how I was
mm,
thinking about nutrition and how I had a relationship to the land and wild places. And anyway, fast forward a couple of years, I was working for a field studies program for college students, and it was so cool. I mean, it was a program I did and that changed my life, where we spent 2 months in the backcountry and learning about permaculture at this homestead. And it was like eco
mm,
psychology and just all these things that I had, blew my world wide open and gave me this sense of membership that I'd never experienced before
mm,
and gave me a way to land sustainability concepts that I'd been learning in school in this like global context. It gave me a way to like live and experience and integrate those things in the day to day capacity and like have a role in them and feel like I was, leading a solution based life in some way, shape, or form. But long story short, there was this primitive skills teacher that um, was coming to teach us like how to make cordage and how to do hand and bow drill fire making and all this kind of stuff. And on the way to the location, there was a someone in the class found a roadkill fox, and they were like, "Oh, we'll pick it
mm,
up and we'll have her do a skinning demonstration." And we got halfway through the demonstration at the end of the workshop, and all my students were going out on a 24-hour wilderness solo. So it was like my one day off as a guide
mm.
in 2 months. And the instructor looked at me and said, "You're going to finish this." And I went, "Nope, no, I'm not." Like, nah, not me. And she said, "No, you're going to finish this." And she put me on my 24-hour solo with a half skinned fox and a piece of obsidian. And I think for the
Oh,
first
with a piece of
yeah,
obsidian.
yeah. I mean, she
Amazing.
was like,
Okay.
yeah, real deal lady. And so uh I think for the first, I don't know how long, like felt like 2 hours, I just sat in front of the thing and stared at it. And then like throughout that process, like, wow, it's so beautiful. Like look at how these colors change and look at the track of this animal and like I know what those look like in the dirt and now I see it in the paw and just
Mm,
like like being able to start to experience this intimacy that I'd never had before with a wild creature. And then eventually I like, picked up where the um fur was still attached and had to like just started exploring it. And then it was like this out of body experience where I watched my hands take over and know
mm,
what to do in front of me.
yeah.
And
Mm.
even though everything in my mind cognitively was telling me, nope, not you. This isn't something you know how to do or that you even want to do. And so for me, it was like this
Mm.
like explosive experience where I was like, oh, even though my brain is telling me this is something I don't know how to do or that I can't do, everything in my body and my hands knows what to do in this moment. And I was like, oh, what else do I know how to do that I don't think I can do? And it was just the coolest opening. So that like led me on this long path to animal processing and animal husbandry and eventually hunting and just like seeking out any opportunity to discover these skills that like may or may not just be in me, and need to be tapped into, which is I think something you and I share where it's like we just
Absolutely.
explore.
Yeah, and I've had those moments where you are connecting with something and your hands and your body are leading the way and your brain is just getting out of the way, and there is that
Yeah.
deep sense of knowing. And I wanna get into a little bit of some of the other skills, but I kinda wanna tease at the idea of a sense of membership and intimacy,
Mm.
because I think
Mm-hmm.
that that is at its core that we as humans have a membership within our ecosystems and within place. And that knowledge lives in a really deep space that transcends our thinking brains. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's so much fundamental to those experiences where you make that connection. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to hear you tease out the idea of a sense of membership.
Oh, yeah. I love this invitation, to see ourselves in this way because I think so many of us have grown up with this understanding that we're separate from nature and that nature is this place that we go visit and it's an area on a map that we go play in or recreate or go for a hike or something like that, and then we go home, or it exists in a farm, but that's over there and we're over here. And to me, it's like that's one of the most heartbreaking, uh, I think, like waking realities
Mm.
of being human today is that we are perceived as separate from nature. And I also think that's what, creates that's like the baseline for so many of the like ecological and environmental issues that we are experiencing is that we view our consumption as something that just happens in a vacuum and doesn't actually have an effect on people or places or ecosystems all over the world. And so I think it's a heartbreaking and jarring concept to start to unpack, where it's like, no, actually, everything that we do in our waking life has an impact on an environment somewhere,
Yeah.
and that's hidden from us most of the time, whether it's where our
Yes.
food is coming from or the raw materials of our clothing or where our trash goes or where our water comes from or all these systems that support our life. It's we're brought up to think that they're hidden or other people manage them for us. um, and in reality, like, it can take a long time to pick apart the pieces if you live an urban life and you have to uncover all these different systems that support you. But I remember taking a bioregional quiz early on in my permaculture study, which I highly recommend to anybody that hasn't done one. They're like really humbling. But I remember just, it was like name 5 migratory birds that live in your area. Where does your water come from? Where does your power come from? How many people are
Mm.
involved? All these things that start to daylight our connections to the people in the natural world around us. And just being so humbled by my personal results of this quiz at the time. Um, and it started me on this path to membership in the ecosystem and realizing like I share a watershed with every other living thing around me from ridge top to river mouth in my
Mm.
area. And I think once I got through like the initial shock and heartbreak of realizing how disconnected my life was at that moment, then it became, something that was the grounding motivation of my passions and my hobbies, which was, oh, well, how do I build all these connections into my life? How do I live in a way that reminds me that, I am actually part of this wild ecosystem around me, and that's been an interesting challenge over the years because I've gone from
Yeah, I
living
was
in
gonna
very
say.
rural places, managing, 250-acre homesteads and farming and having those connections be really obvious and easy to living in very urban places like now Salt Lake City where those connections can be harder to maintain, but they're still just as important. So it's taken on many, many forms, but I think that figuring out for me what those ways are to stay connected to that philosophy um, has been like the consistent motivating healing factor, and whether that's like me dipping off into the wilderness for 8 days at a time or something like that, or just having a cup of rose hip tea in my, suburban home here in Salt Lake. Like it's the same feeling where, I remember that, my health is connected to the wild places around me and I'm a part of this ecosystem.
Quick break, everybody, while I talk about one of our sponsors, Home of Wool. As the temps begin to drop in the Northern Hemisphere, there is no better time to get cozy and to think about your sleep environment than right now. Home of Wool is an incredible company that brings organic and OEKO Ecotech certified materials that are free of any off-gassing or VOCs and are made from incredible natural materials like wool or organic cotton and linen. I am such a big fan of Home of Wool products, especially in my bedroom where I want to create the most cozy sleep environment for winter that I know is going to be regulating my temperature, that is going to be incredibly breathable, is going to be completely free of toxins, is going to wick moisture and resist mold and mildew, and is going to provide me with an incredibly supportive and beautiful night's sleep. And I know that that is wool. Wool has even been shown to raise our heart rate variability while we sleep, which I think is incredible. And I have a comforter and a pillow and a body pillow from Home of Wool, and I just think that they are incredible. They help keep me the right temperature in the winter, not too hot, not too cold, and help provide me with an incredibly comfortable and cozy sleep. And the best part is everything that they do is custom. So you can order custom mattresses or crib mattresses, body pillows, pregnancy pillows, various cushions, and they can customize them with different fabrics, whether that's organic linen and cotton or wool covers, and then this beautiful organic or Ecotech certified wool filling. I just cannot recommend them enough. And if you're looking to upgrade the place where you spend 1/3 of your life, your sleep, or other cushiony, comfy, cozy areas around your home, there is no better place than Home of Wool. And you can get a 10% discount today using the code Kate Kavanaugh. That's my name, KateKavanaugh, by going to homeofwool.com and placing your order today. Again, that's 10% off with the code Kate Kavanaugh, KateKavanaugh. And I can't wait to hear what products you're loving and how you upgrade your sleep with natural materials this winter. Yeah, I want to dive deeper into that, but I want to make sure that we touch on some of what you did prior to this too, because I think that to see some of the permaculture and some of the stewardship of larger tracts of land, and how that lands you where you are is actually really important to your story. It's funny, we don't always do backgrounds on the podcast,
Mm,
but I'm really intrigued at how you moved through all these different spaces and bringing you here to today.
yeah. Um, I mean, I would say this is like journey of a thousand choices, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so if I like had to unpack it all, I'd be like, and then this thing happened, and then little thing
Oh yeah.
happened, and my mindset just, kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed
Hmm.
in all these directions. But there was some like big pivotal experiences along the way. And I think, getting starting from a mindset of and a motivation of personal health, and then learning about ecosystem health and permaculture and sustainability that was tangible to me. Um, that was a crucial part of it. And then exploring, every piece of that journey in various scales, whether that was, animal husbandry and farming, either gardening or, managing CSAs, or like
It's a lot.
it's a lot. Yeah, I mean, I just got hooked, like
Yeah.
I went through all in my 20s. I just it's like I got this I figured out that this was something that I loved to do, and that how there's these things in life where you want to learn them, like cameras. For
Mhm.
me, like I want to learn it, and I'll study up, but I won't retain the information,
Yes.
and like I'll have to like it's just I'm not naturally inclined to have that be the thing that I get good at. This like I always think it's so important to notice what you're fighting in your own cognitive like retention, and then what is actually coming naturally to you and you just become a sponge for. And so like I realized this was my sponge zone, and that like whatever anybody told me about a wild plant or its edibility or like how to find it, I was like zing in, like locked into my brain, like I would know this
Mm.
forever kind of information. And so that was like the sentiment that I had
Hmm.
tapped into, and I could not get enough. Like followed anybody around who was willing to teach me something about wild mushrooms or, edible medicinal plants in the Rockies or whatever it was. And so that was my 20s. um
I think there's two in that, like there's a guiding force of touching something and having that sort of deeper inner knowing unfold where you are both simultaneously learning, being mentored, interacting within an ecosystem and feeling it. I mean that tangible feeling when you pick up the obsidian and you begin to separate the hide from the musculature of that fox. And in that liminal space of knowing and not yet knowing, I think something magical unfolds. Does that make sense?
yeah, totally. And I like to think that that is available to everyone as it relates to like food and nature. Like I want to believe that we all have in us that like innate sense of wonder and connection, and it just needs to be invited in most of us. I think
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean everybody like would be the hunter in the tribe. There'd be other skill sets that
Yeah.
people would master, but I think that's like the really fun part in sharing my personal journey, is that the whole thing I see as an invitation is like, well, you can do this too, like there's nothing, so unique or special about me that
Mm.
makes it that I get to pursue these things, and that that's not possible for you or somebody else, because I see them as, these sort of innate human qualities that we just get to explore, and
Mhm.
people will become more fascinated by certain things than others, but it's out there.
think they're a little bit hidden too. I think in
Oh yeah.
many of the ways that we've hidden away where our food comes from, where our water comes from, where the lithium for our batteries comes from, whatever it is, like we've hidden a lot of that away, and we've also hidden some of the skills that are involved in hunting and farming as an option. I don't think
Hmm.
that growing up, I felt that that was something that I could go into, that that was a career path or even a hobby path. It wasn't
Yeah.
presented to me. And so
Right.
I'm curious for your lens on this, because I do think that we are losing some of the skills that both provide food, provide nourishment, provide stewardship, but also just provide joy. And
Hmm.
we're losing them because we don't see them and have the chance to connect with them. That
Yeah.
invitation.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking, right? Because it's such a beautiful life when you do get to experience these things. And it's like, for me, that's where I experience timelessness and spirituality
Mm,
and um, like a real sense of my body connecting to a place and my nutrition and my health and all those things being connected. And so, yeah, for me, I'm like, oh, I'm like desperate to encourage people to pursue these things because I think that once you do start to experience, your health and your membership in an ecosystem as being connected to the health of wild places, it's like that's where stewardship starts. And if you can get past that heartbreak of, oh my God, I've been robbed of this, or I've been disconnected for so long. Um, and like that can be super traumatic, I think, to
mm,
realize for an individual. It was for me for sure.
interesting.
And I think like once I got past that, then it's motivating, right? And we get to find individual solutions to some of these issues that we wake up, being bombarded with in headlines, and it's like for me, it's like finding ways to participate and
Mhm.
be on a productive path as a human that consumes things and, like requires inputs and has outputs has been super healing, like it just makes it so that I feel like I can make sense of some of what's happening on the planet
Mhm.
right now.
Mhm. I think it gives you a sense of agency
Yeah. Yeah.
at times that it feels like you need an anchor in that space,
Hmm.
and not just a sense of, I know that for me it's not just a sense of productivity, but just a sense of connection that I value a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Well, and the demands of us now as humans in modern society are so intense. Like the attention demands of a phone, the like professionally, I basically write emails for a living. Like that's very intense. Like it's exhausting and weird. And so to like have those requirements of my like primal being also be countered by getting to sit down to a plate of wild game for dinner after a whole day of that and
Mm,
get transported back to the ridge line that I was on when I, released an arrow and shot my mule deer. And like I get to go there spiritually at the end of a day of being a modern
mm.
person. Like it's very important. I feel like it helps, make sense of where we are today a little bit as humans.
It provides an anchor, and I've been interested in reading so much of your writing that you really connect it back to how can we consistently find a sense of belonging, of membership on
Yeah.
a yearly basis, not just inside of a single hunt or inside of a single gardening season even, but
Yeah.
how can we cultivate this? And I pulled something that you wrote, probably hate me for reading it back to you, but I think I'm going to do it anyway. Because I think that this is really beautiful. And I think that you also have a way of how can we do this in a variety of different places? How can we do this from an urban space, from a rural space? And I
Hmm.
really like that point of connection, because I don't think most of us live where nature is just, I mean, nature is everywhere, but where those more open spaces feel like they're right outside our door. So I'll read
Mm-hmm.
this. I live in an urban area, far from the opportunity of directly managing large landscapes in a hands on, holistic way year round. My stewardship relationship to the wild game that I hunt is a creative mosaic. I seek out opportunities like hunting invasive species because it connects me to a greater sense of belonging and membership to the ecosystem. Throughout the year, I work on public lands and wildlife policy, volunteer, monitor game cameras, contribute to research, scout, and take stock of the important habitat for deer, elk, and other species in my region. I tend my garden, nurture pollinators, and plan meals around the success we've had. I pair choice cuts with special occasions to share with my community so the food and the environment it came from can tell its own story. Finding creative ways to live connected to these ideals, tend the land, and share that journey with others is my stewardship. And it's more than just a season.
I don't hate you for reading that. That's really, it's like, yeah, I think, man, writing is so helpful, right? Because we get to like
It's so
really
helpful.
like get our thoughts together. I love it. Um, yeah, it's such a tricky, I've really had to figure that out. Like, how do I maintain these connections in all these various places? And sometimes it's super frustrating, like last year we moved and I left an urban garden that was flush with my, fruit trees I had planted and like this
Mm,
whole yard conversion and chickens and like a permaculture garden that was basically sustaining itself. And now I'm like in a backyard that's half pavement, all grass, like starting over, right? Like it's
yeah.
and so often in my life I've had that exact challenge where I've built a system oftentimes on other people's land that I didn't own, and like had to leave it and start over.
Mm,
And so this feels like this ever present challenge for me of how do I stay connected to this lifestyle that I've been exposed to and that I know is the right thing for me and that makes me the happiest and healthiest and like feel most connected to my soul and passions and the places around me. Like, how do I maintain that in
yeah.
any circumstance, um and so last year I just had like I had wine barrel gardens. That was it. I went from like being having like not being not needing to buy vegetables ever to like here it is,
Yeah.
and it was such a good taste of my own medicine because I always encourage people to be like, just start, no matter what the scale. Like if it's your patio and it's a couple pots of tomatoes, like just start and do it because it's gonna get you outside watering in the morning or the evening. You're gonna hear birds, you're going to see the sunrise, you're going to see the sunset, you're going to get to know that plant, like you're going to develop skills around looking at your soil that's just going to like build and give you more opportunities next year. And so I I felt like I was cracking up at myself because I was like, okay, I'm like the pot garden person right now, but this year it's like I've been able to build on that, and now I got bees last year and I just had all these little um ways of like trying to pull it in and pull it together. But yeah, I think part of what motivated that writing in particular was the challenge of having gone from before I moved here, I was managing 10 acres in Northern California and I'd been there for a long time. And I had a garden and uh, a mature apple orchard that I was restoring and
Mm,
a lot of connected wildland that we'd been tending for natives and hazels and thinning firs and working on encroachment of the meadows there and like starting to do controlled burns and just like I was able
yeah.
to really like live all these concepts and values that I had learned about. And um then I got plopped in the city and I was like, "Ooh," like, what does
Yeah.
this mean now? Like um how do I make sense of this and how do I stay connected? And it was interesting because at that time, it was at the exact same time that I got interested in hunting. And right at the end of managing that landscape in California, I had this funny experience, light bulb moment where I was, we'd done so much work on the surrounding wildland that like the deer population was thriving. I was fighting to keep him out of my garden. I had like these areas where I was raising Ancona ducks and like bringing goats in and all this stuff. And it just felt like I was like blocking all these separate little ecosystems.
Mhm.
Um, and it was like right at the end where I realized, oh, like all the fur thinning and grassland work that we've done and like hazel management and oak tending, like I've been raising deer this entire time. And then I didn't, it was just like ding, and it was the first time that I saw that um that opportunity for like I don't need to keep animals over here from meat and carve out this plot for them. Like I could actually connect all these things. And for me, being like a total wilderness junkie and a backcountry junkie, I was like, this is an interesting opportunity because I also had the experience where like I'd be driving away to go backpack in Yosemite or something, like right as all the apples were falling or my garden needed me, or there was like some tense preservation stress of the food system, and like feeling this tension of like the cultivated and the wild
Yeah.
environment. So when I started to get this inkling of like, oh, the wild environment could be my food source, that was this very exciting thing. And then I moved to the city. So I was like, okay, what does this now mean? And happened at that moment to meet a friend who was a lifelong hunter. And he's a kind of person who like every thing on his wall has a story, and every plate of food in front of you is like the most amazing thing you've ever eaten. And there, it was the first time that I'd been exposed to such reverence in hunting and
Mm.
such like high quality care of the meat and the preparation of the food. And I hammered him with questions until he was like, do you just want to come with me? And I was like, yes. um, so anyway, I ended up hunting that year thinking I would just observe, and then like getting more and more motivated by the training and the preparation and learning how to shoot a rifle and all these things that like went hunting that year, got a deer, and in this very simple, like seemingly unceremonious moment by myself when I got home after that hunt, I like cooked a piece of backstrap in the skillet, just like salt and pepper, butter, not even a big deal. Like ate it standing over the stove and
Yeah.
like had that food, and it just, my life changed forever. I was like,
Mm.
this is for me. And so I think like that stage, then I was like, okay, what does this mean now to have my food system be based on wild land, and how does that change my stewardship perspective and what I need to do throughout the year in order to be like an active participant in its health and maintenance.
I'm really captivated by you called it the tension between cultivated and wild environments, because I think for any of us that are entrenched in either or, you can feel that sense of tension. And I know, as somebody who has spent most of my time in more cultivated environments, you see some of these deep cons of being
Yeah.
tied to them in a certain way, and the amount of your time that they require on a daily basis. And I don't want to say that all environments don't require our time or deserve our time and reciprocity. I don't even want to use the word require, but that there is this tension. And I think it's really interesting to watch you go from a little bit more of a wild environment just on a farm to a more cultivated environment in the city, and then to
Hmm.
flip flop your food system to go from cultivated and to a little bit more wild. And
Hmm.
I'm curious, where that tension came up for you, like what it felt like to go from one place to the other, and to sort of see what is possible, because I think that the tending to wild environments is much more of that bone deep space in who we are as humans. Agriculture has been very short amount of our history.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, I was excited because I felt like it had like solved something that was a
Mm,
friction point for me deep down, and I still have like a garden, and like I cultivate spaces, I'm not like a fully wild food person, but um I've had phases of that which were super fun and really like educational. But um I think it it helped something for me where, because I think so often, we go through these food phases in our cultivated like agriculture environment where it's like, okay, now chia seeds are the answer, or soy's the answer, or avocados are the answer, or whatever it is. Like there's all these moments where um, we get really keyed in on a solution for something, whether it's health or nutrition or farming or whatever. But to me, it's like having learned enough about agriculture and monocropping and um, just most of the agricultural practices that exist out there, it's like we're removing habitat.
yeah.
That's how I see it. Like
Yes.
every diet, no matter what it is, whether it's vegan or vegetarian or omnivore, carnivore, like it takes up land mass,
Mm,
and that land mass is a host and a home to all of these other species. Like the
yeah.
fallout of those agricultural decisions is so huge. And so for me, getting to start to experience connecting my food system to wild land that essentially stayed the same after I harvested
Mm,
and still continued to be this really diverse, thriving, multi-layer ecosystem, was super healing because the trees, the birds, the insects, all of the understory, shrubs,
mm,
everything else got to stay there. And I was just this visitor who came in and harvested mushrooms or, like gooseberries or, packed out my deer and then left. And that all still got to exist. And I got to, feed and nourish myself,
mm.
along with everything else getting to stay intact in that ecosystem. So yeah, I think like that's one of the best like experiences that I've come to over the years is just not slicing and dicing based on, these short-term fads or answers when it comes to cultivated environments, but just thinking about like the area of land that um, my food system takes up and what happens to everything else that is also dependent on that system.
Yeah. Yeah, and within that, and you can speak to this far better than I can. There's membership in terms of managing deer populations in
Yeah.
it without that have no more predators left or have far
Yeah.
fewer predators than they might have. And so there is also an act of being a part of better management of a wild place that we have irrevocably disrupted.
Totally. Yeah, wild pigs are like this fascinating topic when it comes to this because they wreak havoc on ecosystems all over the country. We're in a a size of the land mass means that we'll never eradicate them. Like they require our management as people. We have introduced them
Mhm.
and they're this presence now in the ecosystem. And I did this big like research um, project and hunt in Northern California about the presence of wild pigs because they're completely overrunning the area north of the Russian River. They're starting to cross the Russian River, and they are just doing a lot of damage in that coastal prairie ecosystem. And so people are really upset, and it's a problem. But at the same time, um, ecologists up there are observing that there are actually ecosystem services that they're providing as a proxy to the missing elk and grizzly bear that used to
Mm,
be in that environment, um, with their rooting and digging and how they like scent mark and rub on young furs and keep them from sprouting up all over the grassland. And
interesting.
anyway, it's very interesting because we have this, we've disrupted this ecosystem, and we now have, like, I think we have to change our standards around what these things look like and which species we view as being productive or not productive, and like work in the actual context that exists today. um, and so, my theory at the end of all this was like, we got to make peace with the pigs. Like,
Yeah.
we have to figure out
They're
how to
here.
like use them. They're here, they're not going away.
Nope.
We have to figure out how to like manage them in a way that's beneficial for the environment. And also, what a cool opportunity for a food source, because they're incredibly fecund. They have 4 litters a year. Like, you don't need um, to draw a tag or to wait for this 1 week through the year to hunt them. Like, they're available this whole time. If we just change our mindset around the
Mm.
management and the availability, then what a cool opportunity to, provide for yourself nutritionally, have an amazing outdoor experience pursuing these animals, and also like tend to that landscape and help the vegetation around it have a fighting chance in relation to the presence of all these pigs running amok. um, so I don't know, to me that's more fun than like maintaining a fence and predators in in my backyard or something.
Might be. I don't know. I do a lot of the former, and that sounds pretty good right now. I'm actually going to read because you wrote a really beautiful article about this, and you wrote about the pigs. You said, "It is hard to deny the beauty of the management relationship between pigs and hunters. We are their natural predators, and they a regenerative food source that we could harness the ecosystem services of if managed intentionally. This relationship solves a modern environmental issue while producing delicious food and bestowing meaning and connection for how hunters have engaged and managed their ecosystems for thousands of years."
Yeah,
And
pigs. It's a cool opportunity. I mean, it's similar to axis deer in Hawaii, where there's just this call to action for us to be active participants in our ecosystems, and I think that's really interesting and exciting, and unlocks like a cool opportunity for us.
yeah. And we need more people hunting them, is my understanding. I mean, years ago, there was a book that was released by Barry Estabrook called Pigtails, and he looked at these
Mm,
stories of hogs in all of these. There was conventional farming, pasture-based farming, and then the feral hog population in the United States and some a little bit across the world, and looking at the impacts that they were making along the way. And I loved it as an exploration. It's probably a little bit out of date now, but I think that there is this opportunity where we need more people to step in. And so there is this,
mhm.
again, as you put it, this invitation to come and to learn a skill and to have an opportunity to get a little bit more connected.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the most fascinating things about pigs to me is that whether it's a domesticated pig or a wild pig, it's the same genus and species of Suscrafa. And so they are on this parallel spectrum that we're on of domesticated to feral. They were domesticated as they broke out and started crossing waterways and becoming this, feral subset of the population. They got more wiry, they grew their tusks, like they just took on kind of like how an anadromous fish
Interesting.
migrates between fresh and salt water and adapts its physical features.
Mm.
So it's like also this deeply intellectual, curious thing where like they represent our own sort of relationship to domestication and wild too.
Fascinating. I didn't even really consider how their morphology was changing from domesticated, previously wild, back into wild, and that's actually
Yeah.
changing the way that they look and the way that they wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I'm gonna have to think about that for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's I don't know. I think it just takes down some of these barriers that we all walk around with of like, I live here, they live here,
Hmm.
or, you know, this is my nature
Hmm.
environment, that's an urban environment. When there's like hawks in the city, in the trees, and dandelions growing up in the sidewalks, which is like one of the most best medicinal everyday plants you could possibly use, And so I think anything that starts to break down these barriers of
Hmm.
separation, I just love learning about.
Yeah. I love that too. This actually might be a good space for this. My friend James Connolly always says this, and I pulled this as I was looking at some of the citizen scientist projects you've been a part of
Mm,
with I think it was Joe Reese on habitual migration corridors and looking at the intersections and the spaces where we're seeing wildlife and what we've built as humans kind of intersect and cross one another. And it's a quote from Muhammad Ali. But he says, looking at life from a different perspective makes you realize that it's not the deer that is crossing the road, rather, it's the road that is crossing the forest.
Muhammad Ali said that.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Oh man, the coexistence of habitat and the overlay of human development is, to me, that's like my number one conservation issue. It's like, are we going to be able to maintain the land mass that these
Mm.
species require in order to live their lives, And I think in that um, article that you're referencing, through this citizen science work that I'd started to do here in Utah, I live right at the base of the Wasatch Mountains, and it's the most visited national forest in the country. So we have 5 ski resorts up there, tons of trails. There's a lot of intersected uh, habitat based on recreation. And I participate in this citizen science project called the Wasatch Mammal Watch, where volunteers, we put up and monitor motion censored cameras all over the mountains in order to figure out how human presence affects wildlife behavior and where the species density is, so that that information can be used to do informed development in the area, which I think, philosophically, in my trajectory as a conservationist, originally I was like, keep the people out. Like, we need
Yeah.
wild spaces to just exist, and there should be no participation or
Mm.
blocking of that. And now, like, the reality is, like, we have to figure out how to coexist, and it's not enough just to hate sidewalks. Like, you have to figure
Hmm.
out where the roads need to go and how to, make both possible. Like, there's no other way around it at this point. And so I love participating in this project because it it maps all of that out and gives data to developers and gives us some backing around, like, actually, no, this is where the overpass should be for the freeway because we have the most bottleneck here. And these two separated areas of critical habitat are key to the migration route and stuff like that. But yeah, that I think that would be another one of these like pivotal turns in my life around, like, we have to figure out how to exist with development and population growth, and the loss of habitat and wild
Yeah.
land. And And that's probably informed by just living in such a big city right now and seeing that all the time. This year we had the biggest snowfall in 40 years in Salt Lake, and there were elk wintering in the city.
Mm.
And it was, for
Wow.
me, I'm like, well, yeah, like we are in their winter range,
Yeah.
like we have built homes in their winter range. And um, the mayor closed certain trailheads for hikers and dogs. There was like, special infrastructure set up for the elk that were wintering. And I loved seeing it, like I didn't love seeing that they were having to navigate our urban environment, but I did appreciate the awareness that this was bringing to folks who, maybe have lived here a long time and just haven't ever realized, like, oh, we reside in critical habitat for these
Yeah.
species, and we can figure out how to coexist. But yeah, I think citizen science is a really cool way for people um, to make, like, again, one of these things like gardening or beekeeping or wild foraging or hunting or whatever it is. It's like there's a way for us to actively be involved in proactive management and research without having to be a scientist or, an expert farmer or whatever it is. Like it's a way to participate in some of this stewardship.
May I ask where you've, because I can't leave this without asking this, where you've landed on the ways that we're inevitably encroaching, and also how can we make space for better coexistence? Because I think that this is one of those hard problems, right? That this is what is happening and it's not going to change. And
Hmm.
so then how do we begin to look at ways of being that represent better ways of coexisting than we have been? And I'm just
Yeah.
curious where you've ended up on a philosophical or even at a heart level.
Yeah. I mean, on a heart level, I want to like run away into the into a rural place and like live in a small bubble that
Yeah.
like is very peaceful. But productively
Mm,
speaking, realistically speaking, and, knowing what I know, I think this phase of where I'm at with all of that is like very diligent. I feel diligent. I feel
mm,
like more active and involved in um, being present at those friction points than
mm,
I ever have before. I think it's harder. It was easier for me to run away and live in the woods and like live off the grid and have my perfect little system that worked for me and have my water come from that spring and my power come from solar and my food come from the garden and to live this you know private harmonious life. And I don't know if this is just what happens as you get older and you know, feel more of a responsibility to um, the people around you, or just maybe it's just a product of learning and wanting to, and knowing that all of that development and destruction is going to happen, whether you're in your bubble or not, um, has kind of moved me towards being like front and center at those friction moments and being a really fierce advocate for these things that I care about. And that's in one way like trying to lead a lifestyle that is open and inviting to people who are curious about hunting and gardening and foraging and fishing and wanting to have a deeper connection to the place around them. Like I want to invite that and help make people feel like it's available to them and get them
mm.
on that path to stewardship and membership. And then on the other hand, at this stage in my professional life, it's like I'm on several nonprofit conservation boards. I work in policy and advocacy. Like I have a good understanding of the politics in my area. I'm present at the meetings. I'm like carrying all of these messages, directly into the places where decisions are being made.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like my duty, like
Yeah.
I have to do that. And if I were just secluded alone in the mountains, trying to live this peaceful life, I'd be thinking about that as a role that I
Mhm.
feel responsible in playing.
Has that shifted too with being pregnant and bringing the next generation into a space where I think there are increasing number of friction points?
Yeah, yeah, it's really cool to feel that starting to happen, like I've always thought about stewardship from a multi-generational perspective, and to feel it is something else,
Mm,
and to be curious about how I'm going to be able to teach and inspire this little person to share some of my values is also very exciting, because I've like been a school garden teacher before and been, you know, witnessed like kids of any from any background, like if they're picking a strawberry and eating it, or they're like, they plant spinach and then they get to pluck it out of the ground and put it in their mouth. Like they love to do it. They love to eat it. Like I think I have this theory that like if you involve kids and even adults in these processes, like it taps into these things we all feel and love and sets us on these paths. So I'm curious, this will be a good test of all my theories. um but I also feel, like a deeper connection to a longer timeline and scale of stewardship now than I have before. And I've heard that in other parents and have always respected it. But feeling it is neat.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I was just genuinely curious because I think that these small things can shift us in I mean they're big things, but these big things can shift us in big ways and the way that we view that aspect of
Yeah,
stewardship. Yeah.
I'm so curious because I was bow hunting in Hawaii a couple months ago, and I was 7 months pregnant at the time, which I don't necessarily recommend hunting 7 months pregnant, but like I'm really glad that I did it.
Yeah.
Um, but I was so curious. Like there's these photos of me, with a pig and a goat and like this giant belly and all this stuff, and um, which by the way, that pig that we got had been eating like mac nuts and guavas, like ground fall, and it's like one of the best
Wow.
meats I've ever eaten. Yeah, like it's just out of this world good. Um, but I was thinking about like how you like I subscribe to the philosophy that like we aren't just these moldable humans, that we like come into the world with a soul and a spirit and like a genetic identity that is not
Mm,
entirely shapeable by the people around
mm.
us, and so thinking about that as a parent, I'm like, who is this person going to be, and are they going to think I'm nuts when they look back and see these photos of like them in my belly and me all dressed in camo hunting, and like, will we share that, or am I going to be like a dance mom, like who knows, it's just like that
Yeah.
irony is totally up for discovery in my world. But yeah,
Another
it's
surprise.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
another true surprise. I agree that and
Hmm.
have their own identity and dreams and desires of ways of being in this world. But
Yeah.
I think it's incredible that you were out there bow hunting at 7 months pregnant, and I saw the pictures, and
Yeah.
I think it
Oh
was
my gosh.
fantastic to see, and I think that truly it's not something that we see modeled in culture. And I'll be honest that I don't love, and maybe you share this, I don't love the female butcher uh,
Mm,
sort of pigeonhole that I get oftentimes.
yeah.
And to be out there hunting at 7 months pregnant gives people an invitation that I think we almost never see. I don't know that I have ever seen that really in any place. And that is a beautiful invitation.
Yeah. Well, and my realization around it was like, oh, this is why like women run marathons when they're super pregnant. It's not like it's because that's what they love to do and that's how they feel alive and
Mm.
connected to who they are and their passions. I'm like, that's why I'm hunting. I'm not hunting right now because it's super comfortable and I feel like
Hmm.
physically really all about it. Like I was exhausted and breathing really heavy and like my clothes didn't fit and all this stuff, but like it was important to me to feeling like alive and connecting to myself and rooted in my values. And I was like, that's why I did it.
Mm.
And that's why I think we often see people like pursuing these things at odd times. you know
Yeah, because we have to. I don't ever want to be severed from the things that make me feel alive. And I think that to give that to the next generation too, that sense of following what makes you feel so deeply alive is a gift in and of itself, even in the face of physical discomfort.
hmm yeah, yeah, and I hope that's like the mentality I can maintain as a mother too, because this is all up. I get so many frustrating responses just being a woman in the hunting space because we're 95% of registered hunters are male. It's probably very similar for you in the butchering space. And people are already telling me what my future is going to look like as a mom with these
Oh,
passions, and I'm like, oh, you
oh,
have no idea. you know
that
like
irritates
they're
me
like,
to
oh,
no
I
end.
yeah, 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 yeah. Like people will be like, "Oh, guess your fall's ruined this year because you're having a baby." And I'm like, "No, it's not. Like I'm going to do things that I love to do. It's gonna look different and it's gonna be game time decisions, and way more flexible than what it's been in the past." But they just, you know, I hope that I'm living in a way that is to me as a parent, like you have to be connected to your passions and the
Yes.
things that keep you feeling alive in order to be a good role model and be a
Yes.
loving and available, steward for this little life
Yes.
that's coming in. So like it's not an option for me to be like, "Oh, I just won't do these things anymore because it's harder or I don't have as much time." It's like,
Mm.
"No, this is an increased, call to action of how are you going to continue to be a role model and live your values."
Arguably more important than it's ever been before to step into that aliveness so that you can continue to
Mm.
cultivate the most amount of presence for that child.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is where I've been thinking a lot about, like, the difference between hobbies and ways of life,
Mm.
and I think there's some things that will be in a hobby category for me that are easier to, like, pick up and put down, and then there are other things that are like, "No, this is my way of life, and
Mm.
this is just gonna have to be we're gonna have to figure out how to make it work," you know?
Yeah. Oh, I love the invitation to explore that just for myself. Like what is hobby and
Mm.
what is way of life? I think that's a beautiful way of looking at things, and I'm gonna take that away and kind of ask myself that question later on, to be
Well, I
honest.
think about that for you often because, like, especially with like diet and nutrition, like they're like this is a way of life for you because you've healed yourself
Mhm.
through this knowledge and this learning and like it's not just something that is fun to learn
No.
or entertaining. Like this is your way of life. And so yeah, when I witness people like you who have like such clarity and drive around the things that they pursue, it it makes me reflect on that as well and sort of identify which is which in my own world.
Mm. Thank you for that. Thank you. Just thank you.
Mhm.
I think this is actually a good place. One of the things that I wanted to explore with you is the mirror between stewarding land and stewarding bodies. And I think one of the things that I
Ooh.
watched you go through was your partial knee replacement. And
Mhm.
watched the way that you approached the stewardship of your body before that too, when you were experiencing so much discomfort and still continuing to perform as a high level athlete. And I know that for myself, I've seen a lot of how we steward our bodies, how we steward the bodies of our communities, and how we steward land have a lot of tie ins together.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I will start this by saying that the the stewardship of my physical body is feels like a lifelong challenge that I'm always going to be
For all of
like
us, we're stuck here.
figuring out. Like oh man, just and being pregnant has like brought this up in a whole nother way. Like experiencing limitations or, finding thresholds and really respecting what's possible today, versus what was possible yesterday
Mm.
or what do I think my body owes me in this moment, Um, but yeah, I I mean, I grew up like an athlete with every coach telling me pain is weakness leaving the body. And so
Mm.
I've had to like undo that my entire life and have been through so many like big surgeries. And I had a spinal fusion when I was 16 and for scoliosis and,
Wow.
just didn't know anything about anything as it relates to like real healing, mentally or physically, or like the modalities outside of pharmaceuticals and x-rays and a doctor being like, you're cleared, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so it's taken me a long time to get to um, the place that I found last year and the year before, which was this really like great recovery and application of my skills and learning as it relates to that knee surgery. I'd had a couple before, went back to sports and an active lifestyle too soon, like got myself in the position
Yeah.
essentially that I, was in, of having to face this big surgery and like serious degradation of my body. Um, and it was so empowering to go through it. I think leading up to it, I'd put it off for a really long time. Similar to like hunting pregnant, like just gritted through the discomfort and the pain because like my soul needed to do these things,
Mhm.
right? And then had the reckoning of I need to face this and deal with it. Um, and man, all of the talk about like wild food being a portal in those moments when I was stuck in the city on the couch, icing my leg 5 times a day, like completely unable to do the things that help me feel connected to my wild spirit. But like having those meals at night, remembering my success as a
Mm.
hunter, like connecting to that nourishment, having that wild food become a part of me and a part of, my DNA and feeling like the healing connection both like physically and spiritually was so, so important,
Yeah.
and I think that's why canning peaches is so awesome. And, like having pickles and all that stuff is because, like, there are these portals that just, bring us back to a different time in the season, maybe
Yes.
when it's dark and stormy out and you remember the sunshine and you get to taste it and experience it and all of that. So I think more than ever now, like I have those touch points all throughout my house because it's like I need them. Like I need to
Mm.
stand up from 4 or 5 hours of gnarly emails and phone calls or whatever it is and like look at pheasant feathers and remember my time in the fall or whatever, like
Yeah.
it's just part of staying connected for me. But yeah, I think there's been some cool um parts along this journey that have helped me understand my health and the health of wildlands through food, and see food is medicine, as you talk about a lot.
Mhm,
Um, Deconstructing kind of the modern food system and how we view food as one thing and medicine as another thing,
mhm.
and really looking at them as combined, like that's a cool door to open. you
Yeah.
know once we get to start doing that, then it's like, oh, I'm actually maintaining my health and nurturing my body like all day long,
Mhm.
and it's so much more fun than taking a vitamin. um but yeah, and then like once you kind of open that door, then I mean, in the plant world, it's just a phenomenally cool experience because like you get to deconstruct where, medicine comes from
Mhm.
and
A
look at it in a different
all of
way.
it is
And
derived.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, exactly, exactly. And so then suddenly the backcountry is also your first aid kit.
Mm.
And, or your I remember being on my first 2-week wilderness trip with that program I was mentioning early on. Um, and we were in the backcountry for 2 weeks, and I started to get a cold. And somebody gave me a field guide. I think it was Michael Moore's Wild Edible Medicinals of the Pacific Northwest, and he's got amazing books for a ton of regions. But it was the first time anybody had opened that door for me, and I went out and found yerba santa and made myself some tea. And that night by the campfire, my nose turned into a faucet, and I had like healed myself in that moment by going on a hike and harvesting a wild plant. And so anyway, I think that journey of, I know we've come a long way from knee surgery, but like the way to view like health and wild land and our connection to these places as integrated both physically and spiritually is, man, it's just a fun life.
You mentioned something, I think you explained it without saying it, because food is medicine, yes, but you also talked about place and story as medicine. And you used the
Hmm.
word portals, which I think is so beautiful, that when we pull out a can of peaches on a stormy winter night, it transports us to another place. And that is a certain kind of medicine for our souls in that dark night of winter. But that place is also a part of it, that being a part of place provides a sense of medicine, not just in what it provides literally from the land, but that feeling of connection. And so that both place and story are playing a role in our physical and psycho-spiritual health.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've had my heart broken by like losing my sense of place more than anything
Yes,
else in my life.
me too. Me too. My biggest
Yeah.
heartbreak was leaving the West.
Yeah.
And it behaved like a heartbreak, right? There was
Yeah.
wild out of control grief. There was a feeling that I couldn't reclaim something that I had once had that I had lost, like deep
Mhm.
disconnection.
Mhm. Yeah, and on the flip side, it's this like what you lose is that feeling of walking around and seeing the plants that you recognize popping up in the spring of like, "Oh, welcome back. Oh, you're here. We're
Mm.
all here together." Like that feeling of community and home that extends beyond the human environment. And yeah, once you I mean, that's just like probably should be a warning for anybody listening to this podcast of like once you engage in these types of things, you open yourself up to that level of connection has an equal level of heartbreak
Yeah. I mean, it's intimacy,
and
it's
that's just what
relationship.
relationship. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's relationship, it's intimacy.
Yeah.
It's affection, it's all of the things that lead to heartbreak.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So you
And
gotta
it's
be
worth it.
brave in addition. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
be
totally
brave,
worth
be
it. Yeah.
vulnerable. It's totally worth it.
Yeah. Mhm.
That actually brings something up that I wanted to you've said this a couple of times. You've said this in writing and you've said this in podcasts that one of your favorite things is to see the unseen in nature.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I just want to hear you talk about that because I think that I think that there is a lot that is unseen right now, but I also think that when we have that sense of intimacy and relationship, that there is an opportunity to be a witness to
Mm,
where we are at this point in time, to see maybe those friction points, but also to see something else, to see something beyond that. And so I'd love to hear how that shows up for you.
yeah, I think this stemmed for me in when I started learning about being a naturalist and all of the and like pattern language and permaculture
Mm,
and all of these cycles that are happening around us that we are oblivious to until we start paying attention and realize that they're like patterning this whole existence around us, and we can either participate it and harness it and be a part of it or continue to be oblivious, right? Like
yeah.
in in home design, like passive solar heating and wind blocks and all these ways that we can like have a more neutral presence in our ecosystem or not, you know.
Or not.
So that there are these, yeah, so there's just all these forces, you know, energetic, physical, um, natural, and then the same in like a wildlife environment where um I think I'd like spent enough time with people who were teaching me about um, like reading tracks and sign in the natural world, and it felt like this almost like this Easter egg hunt of like, you know, all of a sudden you see something and it leads to something else and it leads to something else, and like there's tracks in the mud on the ground, and then you go past a tree and there's like hair stuck in the bark
Mm,
from the animal that had brushed past. And I think like so often we want to see the bear, right? But
mm,
like there are all these, and oftentimes you don't. If you're just hiking along and gabbing with your friends, like you think that you're the only one there. But if you stop and you pay attention, you can start to unfold all these small details of an environment that unfold this like orchestra of life that is existing and like just kind of like giving you the sneak all the time. Which I think like now it's like this game that I like to play where it's like, ooh, I can like find out who is here and what happened and be this like nature detective, you know, who gets to like find out the story of
mm.
what went down here this morning. Or and I love like being a part of that, immersing myself in that mystery. And then of course as a hunter, like those are the skills you need in order to be successful. So now it's part of how I pursue my food, and like typically, you know, more success or less success, like those skills are required of me. But um and then I think in the like the larger context of our built landscape, like we have this um like technology where it is today is allowing us to map and record data about all these typically unseen things, you know, and migration is one of them, where we have decades now of radio collar um, data for mule deer migration, elk, pronghorn, all these species in the West that are showing us like here's where they're going. And it's they're not navigating these places because they want to, they're navigating them because they have to.
Yeah.
And it puts it on a map and makes this typically unseen pattern so visible and
Mm.
undeniable. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think it's like this tapping in journey, right? Like you can either wake up and sit through the sunrise and see the birds and like be a part of that show, or you can sleep in. You know, you can see it or not see it. It's kind of up to you um to start to peel back the layers and like put yourself in a participatory environment.
I think too that there's an aspect of honing a skill of observation. I think about this a
Mm,
lot when it comes to farming, when it comes to foraging, that there is a bit of a learning curve to becoming an observer. And I think oftentimes we become numb to our built environments and we carry with us that numbness into more wild landscapes. And we have to reawaken that sense of being able to see where the tracks lead into the hair caught on a little piece of bark, or to notice the habitat of red-winged blackbirds in the wetlands and how you might want to move cattle around that space. Oh, so whatever it
mhm.
is. And
Yeah,
it's a skill.
it's a skill. I often call it like a calibration between these environments, right? Where
Hmm.
it's like you I feel like I have to very consciously go back and forth between the two. Like I have to calibrate my senses in order to tolerate notifications and noises all day long in my work world, and like that takes a tuning out.
Yes.
It takes like building
Numbing.
up a tolerance and a threshold to be able to handle that. You can't take it all in. And then on the other side of things, I have to recalibrate to open that all back up and be available for those tiny, tiny, tiny cues that happen in the natural world. And um, every year before the hunting season, like that's why I go scouting. That's why I practice getting up, a few hours before dawn and sitting still through a sunrise and glassing and looking for patterns and tracks and all
Hmm.
that stuff because I have to those are skills that I have to recalibrate and balance from my normal day-to-day environment. So I don't I don't I don't underestimate how hard that is for modern people, to go back and forth
Yeah.
between those things. I do very much see it as a skill for survival in both contexts.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And to learn how to, I mean, I think being able to orient in even the built environment is important, and to find that
Mhm.
ability to have that window of tolerance that's right for where you are and to titrate all of the stimuli. And
Yeah.
then but then it takes, actually, I think for me, I know that sometimes it takes a great deal of effort to remain open enough to be able to
Yes.
feel that when I leave my built environment, and to have a sense of maybe even vulnerability now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you've experienced those swings, it's like again one of those um times in life where it's like it's easier just to go hide away and
Yeah.
not face the chaos of modern society. Like that's why it's so hard to re-enter the world after a wilderness trip or some type of immersion because you're like, oh my god,
Yeah.
there's too much here. But yeah, I think it's a very important level of like care and awareness um, that I've had to learn kind of living the lifestyle I live, which is, being deeply immersed in like a very modern,
Yeah.
high paced professional urban world, and then also still being able to like have my wits about me when I go into the wilderness and like I'll have friends who I don't know, maybe they have an animal that needs tending to or like a roadkill situation or whatever it is, and my whole like philosophy on that has always been like, "Oh, I'm gonna go I'll help you skin that bobcat, like, I don't want the fur, I just wanna keep my skills up," Like, just any chance I get to
Yeah.
sort of balance these things, I think gives me confidence that I can go back and forth.
I love this too as an invitation for other people that live in urban environments. And also, I think the view it gives you to toggle back and forth between these two very
Mm,
disparate worlds, that it gives you a unique view of the friction points that are happening in these
mhm.
spaces. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. I I have a funny place I want to take us next that was actually really important for me to touch on with you. And I hope that's okay. And I couldn't decide what to call this because it's not failure. But you've written a lot about unfilled tags and about
Mm.
cultivating this sense of skill and having these moments that are frustrating. And I pulled a little bit, but I think that I've been thinking a lot about failure in my entrepreneur life and what
Mm.
success looks like and what failure looks like and how we approach the idea of not failure so much as a dream or an idea that we have that might not turn out the way that we had ideally imagined. And I think an unfilled tag is that. And I think that there are many things in life. And I'm curious to get your slant on this. And I'll read these two things that you wrote. And it was about not filling a tag, but this past mule deer season taught me that I have to find my pace in the long game. I am actually capable of feeling self doubt and a sense of progress at the same time. And I'm learning what it takes to source endurance every day. And then you also said, the goals I have for myself as a hunter and an entrepreneur have required boldness, but also digging in during moments of sheer exhaustion and self doubt. I've learned that beginning is actually pretty easy, but what comes next takes endurance, maintenance, and constant recommitment. I think we covered a little bit of that beginning being easy a little bit back in the interview, but I loved this because I think that oftentimes there are unfilled tags, both literally and figuratively in our life. And it's a big part of what we are here to navigate.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember, the stage of my hunting journey I was at when I wrote that article, which was, I think it was like my second through my second, third, and fourth season, where I had realized that this was my life's journey for now, like that this was something that I had to learn, um, and had help initially, and then was like in it to figure it out. And um, it didn't feel like an option to me, like because I think it had tied together so many of my um, like the key points in my life getting to there. I was like, this is my direction. I have to learn it, and I was just struggling so hard.
Yeah.
And so uh there was one like a that really frustrating stage of bumbling around as a new person doing something and just continually being shown the how it wasn't working, like spooking deer or just not even seeing a deer for 6 days straight, being so exhausted, like feeling like I didn't have the mental stamina
Mm.
developed, or doubting every direction I was taking in the woods. Like, am I actually in habitat? Am I actually in the right place at the right time? All that stuff. And when you're hunting by yourself, like it's just, if you're not careful, like there's a lot of time to think.
Yeah.
um and so I was, and at the same time being so clear that like this was my food source now. So there was this like deep
Pressure.
need
Wait.
to feel, yes, exactly. And the added layer of like you in Utah, like that was when I was hunting the general rifle season here, and you have about 9 days in the year to make it happen. And that's it. So it is, there is a ton of pressure. And if some person, you've hiked in early, you've got on a ridge line and you're in your spot, and like some person walks through the valley that you've earned, physically getting there, like it can ruin your whole morning. And it's really frustrating. It can feel, um, like unrecoverable. So there's just a ton of highs and lows. And at the time I was also um, running a business and experiencing that similar like redlining threshold of just, being so committed to something and having to show up every day, still willing to do it. And I think that's part of Seth Gordon has some really awesome philosophies around these sorts of things when it comes to like creativity and determination and success, where it's like, yeah, you don't wait for the perfect morning and the hot cup of coffee, um, and and like the inspiration to flow in order to sit down and do your writing. Like
Yeah.
you have to just do it. You have to essentially like grind it out and work in those moments where you do feel exhausted, and like continue to recommit to the things that you have decided you're doing. And so I think at that time I was being faced with like grit and determination at all levels, and it was really challenging me to define for myself like what was success and what was failure, um, in these paths of like really intense learning, or these stages of really intense learning.
Has it shifted over the years and now even into pregnancy?
Yes. Well, you know what's funny is I feel like I'm on the cusp of like this starting all over. Like I've gotten, I think 5 years into hunting was when I started being able to like consistently find animals. And I remember just being like, oh my God, I feel so accomplished. And that's like just finding them in binoculars at a distance, like knowing what pattern to look for when you're 3 miles away, and when and where, and how to like spot and glass and all that stuff. And just the feeling of accomplishment to be able to go out and consistently find animals. I was like, oh, I'm like so proud of this. And then when I started to move from rifle hunting, which in my opinion is like the good beginner route to go, even though I had the goal of getting into bow hunting, when I started to become a successful bow hunter, which is something that I like at different points along that journey, years 2, 3, 4, I was like, I'll probably never be able to do that. Like I felt the dream sort of slip away
Mhm.
because it had been so hard to accomplish like the stage that I was in. Um, so it was like all these unlocks. And then last year, um, I harvested my first bull elk with my bow. And it was such an interesting reflection because I remember being hunter safety with a bunch of 13-year-old boys, and actually my husband who I met there, which is a whole nother funny story, but um, going around the room and everybody being like, why are you here? What do you want to do? And I remember them being like, I was the only female in the room. And people are like, oh, I want to deer hunt with my dad, and I want to go duck hunting, and I want to do this. And like, it got to me, and I was like, I want to bow hunt elk. Like, I want to become an archery elk
Mm.
hunter. And it just like spilled out of my mouth. And that's like,
Mm.
it's like black belt hunting,
Yeah.
like it's, and, and along the course of learning how to hunt, I had started to like feel that goal slip away because of learning just more and more how much it was going to take, and how like kind of not impossible it was, but how impossible it started to feel. And so last year when I like accomplished that goal, it was such a good lesson in like not losing sight of the things that like are deeply in us as desires and motivations, even though we're experiencing setbacks and failure, quote unquote, and like all of the things that um and like just make a learning path so rich and challenging. um yeah, and so I fully expect that motherhood is similarly going to knock me into a really humble place where I'm like, oh boy, like here we go, because it's it's one of these things that you can read and learn things, but it's this is going to be an experiential journey, and
Mm.
just have to be ready for the ups and downs and the things that inevitably you're going to face that remind you that you're not an expert.
And won't ever be one, I think, in the journey of
Right,
parenting.
right.
Maybe, I don't know. I won't speak for that, but
Yeah.
just always a journey. I
Hmm.
I mean, I think in many ways that's a really beautiful place to wrap up. I would thank you for that piece. I think that that is a really good reminder of what it is to learn something that you're devoted to and to be in service to
Mm,
that goal
hmm.
and to hold through the hardship and the perceived sense of quote unquote failures that happen in it. Um,
Yeah.
I think I needed to hear that.
Yeah, it's a good I needed to hear some of the things you reread today. That was like helpful.
Yeah, I'm curious if you have anything to add. I know that we went some really different places. I've listened to you on some podcasts, and I think that you've put out so much amazing work for people that want to find an entry point into hunting and want to find an entry point too into doing some citizen scientist work. Um, And I don't know how much I've seen on policy and advocacy work, but I think that one of the beautiful things is that, and something I really want to bring into this is how can people living in an urban space find their way into connection and a sense of stewardship? And I'm really grateful for what you're doing to create an invitation for that.
Yeah. Well, I think first thing is it just I'm always available. Like this is my favorite set of topics on the internet and social media. So if anybody has, questions about where to start or what to do or how to pursue um, these types of interests in their environment, like please reach out and let's workshop it and figure out, who to connect you with. But just the biggest thing is try something, and I think what I've learned over the years is that there's so many like stones to turn over in any community of experts and people who are
Mm.
passionate about these types of things and willing to teach others and who might be looking for someone to take them under their wing. So whether that's, I've had a lot of luck um, tracking down like local mycology societies and like plant community people and just like seeking out those opportunities to get on a hike with somebody who's knowledgeable and learn from their experience. So I would say like start exploring your local community and the nonprofits and the citizen science groups and the different naturalist organizations or botanical societies or whatever it is that you can find, and go hang out with those folks because they're going to be the most knowledgeable and inspiring experts in your area, and they're probably going to teach you a ton. And what was your other question?
Well, I
um
I don't even know that now, but I love this because I think that this is also a good place to connect back into community. And I think that this is actually something
yeah.
that we're deeply missing. And these are going to be diverse communities of people that you might not otherwise find. I mean, this is being brought together by an interest. And so I really like that as a lever to pull.
Yeah. Oh, and it was policy. That's
Yeah.
on the how to get involved. So this is like I don't consider myself a policy expert, and I never will be, and that's because I've worked enough with like lifelong DC policy folks to know I will never be at their level. So I consider myself like a very like a lay person in this arena. And I've also learned that that's like a very powerful role because you
Mm,
are speaking from experience of the place that you represent and that you live, and you are the knowledgeable person, and
mm,
you are the messenger for your environment, and that is a critical role in the grand scheme of political advocacy. So don't
mm,
underestimate your role in this if you know nothing about policy or advocacy or getting involved. Um, on the There's tons of ways. Again, it's like start digging in your community because this stuff really starts small scale and then power builds into larger and larger groups and organizations from there. On like the sportsman side of things, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership is a coalition of all of the species interest groups, from Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to the Mule Deer Foundation to Pheasants Forever. And all of those groups have local chapters typically in their states. And it's the same for a lot of other conservation organizations where there'll be these local contingencies of folks to learn from and get involved with that then ladder up to these larger coalitions of people who are working to organize, all of us. So I start there definitely. There's also like the Outdoor Alliance is a really cool one that makes getting involved um, in conservation work for public lands like very easy. And that's their whole mission is working with and motivating individuals who are passionate and giving them the tools and resources to participate. So, yeah, I think my message there is don't underestimate your role and
mm,
don't think you're not qualified because you're needed and there's lots of folks ready to kind of help you on your journey.
mm. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of this wisdom. I often find that interviews find me in a place where I needed to hear what someone had to say, and there was a lot of that here today, and I'm just really appreciative of that. So I just want to
Oh,
thank you. This found me
thanks,
exactly where
Kate.
I needed it.
I mean, it's such a treat to spend the time digging into our whys, right? Like
Yeah,
it's a reset for my day too. And yeah, it's reflection is such a gift when we can sit down and do it.
it is.
So I appreciate the invitation. I'm honored to be a guest
Yeah.
on your show. This is the podcast is truly been something to watch and listen to,
Mm,
and I really
thank you.
admire your dedication to these topics and who you're bringing in. And it's just a really cool community of experts and passionate folks.
Thank you. Tell people where they can find you, and I'll have all of this in show notes, but just so I know what's
So
best.
yeah, Instagram, Lindsey.Browne.Davis, and Brown has an E, so that's the tricky part. And my website is the same if you want to find some of these articles that Kate has been referencing or reach out and chat about your own passions and journeys. That's another way too, and that's lindseybrownedavis.com.
I love it. Thank you again so much. I'm so excited for people to hear this and to find it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. If what you found resonated with you, may I ask that you share it with your friends or leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts? This act of reciprocity helps others find Mind, Body, and Soil. If you're looking for more, you can find us at groundworkcollective.com and at Kate_Kavanaugh, that's KATE_KAVANAUGH on Instagram. I would like to give a very special thank you to China and Seth Kent of the band All Right for the clips from their beautiful song Over the Edge from their album The Crucible. You can find them at All Right on Instagram and wherever you listen to music.